Arrest warrants have been issued by the judges of the International Criminal Court, the world's top war crimes court, for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the country's former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. The judges say there are reasonable grounds to believe that Mr Netanyahu and Mr Gallant committed war crimes and crimes against humanity by restricting humanitarian aid and by targeting civilians during Israel's military action in Gaza. An arrest warrant has also been issued for the military commander of Hamas, Mohammed Deif, but Israel says he was killed in an airstrike in Gaza in July. The reaction from Israel and the United States has been quick and damning. Joe Biden has described the move by the International Court as outrageous. And last night, Prime Minister Netanyahu condemned the court's action in withering terms.
This
is an anti-Semitic step that has one goal: to deter me, to deter us, from exercising our natural right to defend ourselves against enemies who are rising up against us to destroy us. The State of Israel is accused of genocide, while we are working to defend ourselves from an enemy who is trying to commit genocide against us. We are accused of deliberately harming civilians, while we are doing everything to prevent harm to civilians.
A total of 124 countries are signatories to the International Criminal Court, including the United Kingdom, but not the United States, not Russia, not China, and not Israel. What does that mean? It means that technically, if either Mr Netanyahu or Mr Gallant sets foot in any of the signatory countries, they must be arrested and handed over to the court for trial. But is that likely to happen? Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has already said he will ignore the ruling. He has actually invited Prime Minister Netanyahu to make an official visit to his country. The Irish government, along with Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands and France, have confirmed that they will respect the court's decision and potentially arrest Prime Minister Netanyahu if he travelled to one of their countries, though I don't think anybody expects Benjamin Netanyahu to visit Ireland anytime soon. What of the United Kingdom? This was the response this morning from the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, speaking to Nick Ferrari on LBC.
Were Benjamin Netanyahu to land in London or any other part of the United Kingdom, would he be arrested?
So that's not a matter for me as Home Secretary.
What?
As you know,
you're the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper.
Yeah, so there's a proper process, Nick, and I'll just say something about that. So sure. With the International Criminal Court cases, obviously that is independent. We respect their independence, and the vast majority never become issues for the UK legal process, law enforcement processes, or for the UK government. If cases ever do become a matter for the UK, then there is a proper legal process that has to be followed. There's a proper government process, including a Foreign Office process that has to be followed. And therefore, it's not appropriate for me to comment on any individual case as Home Secretary.
Let's come to your view, your personal view.
And I totally understand why you are asking me that question, Nick, but you, I know, will also understand why, as Home Secretary, I cannot comment on speculative legal processes because it's important that they are properly followed.
Well, that was the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, speaking this morning. What do you think? What should be the UK government's official response to this historic decision, this historic ruling by the International Criminal Court judges? The number to call, 03030 80 55 55. We'll take your text, obviously, on 81771. If you have any questions, use the hashtag BBC Talkback on any of the social platforms you're on. Jonathan Turner is with us, Chief Executive of UK Lawyers for Israel. Welcome, Jonathan. We've got Dr. Brian Kelly, Reader in History at Queen's University. Brian's a member of the Queen's Palestine Assembly. Good to have you with us, Brian. Angela Epstein, the journalist, writes for The Times, The Telegraph and The Mail. Welcome, Angela. Good to have you with us too. And Patrick Corrigan, who is the Northern Ireland Director for Amnesty International. Welcome, Patrick. In fact, let's begin with you. Patrick, what do you think the UK government should be saying at this point?
Well, I think yesterday's arrest warrants were a really important moment for the rule of law internationally, the sense that the wheels of international justice were finally catching up with those alleged to be responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity committed in both Palestine and Israel. And we've been waiting for these arrest warrants to be issued for quite some time following a sort of a long investigation. So it's a breakthrough for justice. The responses are, as you would expect, and you've already sort of noted some of them. In terms of the UK government, it's quite clear the UK government is a member of the International Criminal Court, as a signatory to it. The Keir Starmer yesterday made clear that the UK supported the international rule of law and the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction. And so following from that, although obviously, as we just heard from Yvette Cooper, they haven't been quite willing to say this on the record yet, but following from that, the UK absolutely has an obligation to arrest these wanted men, Netanyahu, Gallant, Deif, if they put a foot on UK soil. I mean, I note that when David Lammy, the now Foreign Secretary, when he was in opposition, he said that in government they would comply with any arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. And so we now need to see the UK government following through on that and unequivocally backing this vitally important move by the ICC. And I think, the UK standing as a genuine supporter of the rule of law requires consistency and even-handedness. So if war crimes are wrong when carried out by Russian forces in unlawfully occupied Ukraine, then they are equally wrong when carried out by Israeli forces in unlawfully occupied Palestinian territory.
And just to be clear, these are arrest warrants, obviously not guilty verdicts. Arrest warrants would lead to a trial if there was an arrest, but there's no guilty verdict, obviously, at this point in respect of any of those cases. Angela, same question to you. Welcome, Angela. But also, what did you make of this rather process-driven, sort of bureaucratic response we heard to that direct question put to Yvette Cooper by Nick Ferrari this morning?
Well, I would have liked our Home Secretary to have shown a bit of muscle. The Tories previously rejected a request for approval of an arrest warrant. It's clear that the chief prosecutor who is motivating this warrant has been sort of agitated by the likes of South Africa, who have a far more awful human rights record. But let's just be clear. She should have said simply this: there is no moral equivalence, as the government has said, between Hamas, a terrorist organisation, and Israel, a sovereign nation entitled to protect its citizens. But she should have gone further and said, look, Israel is carrying out a war it did not want. It was provoked into it by an attack by Hamas, who raped, kidnapped, brutalized, burnt, murdered innocent people in the name of their ultimate goal, which is to destroy the state of Israel and anybody who lives in it. And the idea that the ICC should back a terrorist organization over a democracy that believes in freedom — Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East — is for the birds. The other thing is considering...
Just to be clear, the ICC is not backing any terrorist organisations. That's not what they've said.
Of course they are. Of course they are, because the only person that they are prosecuting or issuing a warrant for in the name of so-called balance is a terrorist who is dead. Benjamin Netanyahu is a democratically elected sovereign leader who is trying to protect his citizens after a hostile and unprovoked attack. Now, we can disagree politically with the way that wars play out, but war is war, and in war, unfortunately, terribly, lamentably, innocent people get killed. Israel has repeatedly said the innocent people of Gaza are not their target. If Hamas secretes itself in densely populated areas and Israel has asked or tried to get innocent people moved out of the way, then what can they do? And I would just say one other thing. Having been in Israel at the time of October 7th, at the time of October 6th, when this came out of the blue, which absolutely demonstrates how Israel was not warmongering, the country was going out of its business. And then more recently, when I've had to run to shelters a few weeks ago when rockets were falling on Israel, without any warnings, Hamas and Hezbollah don't drop leaflets saying get out of the way. They just want to kill everybody. It is absolutely disgraceful, shameful, vindictive and absurd that the International Criminal Court should be doing this. And I would just say one other thing to your contributor who spoke about the rule of law. If he believes in the rule of law, then the criminal court, the International Criminal Court, as some kind of instrument of global justice, absolutely smashes any authentic entitlement that it has to propagating law in this way.
Incidentally, overnight, Hamas has welcomed this decision, the issuing of these arrest warrants, though it should be said they did not comment on the issuing of an arrest warrant for one of its own military commanders, Mohammed Deif, who, as we understand, is no longer with us. He's dead. He was taken out by Israeli strikes in Gaza in July, as we understand it. So you might be wondering if it's good for the goose, for the gander, if you're accepting that these arrest warrants under claims of war crimes are well made and you're in Hamas, then presumably you'll have to accept they're well made in respect of Hamas's actions as well. Brian Kelly, what do you think?
Well, I think that, it's worth saying, William, that I think it's not only Hamas that has welcomed the indictments or the warrant. Palestinian people overwhelmingly have looked to this as a long-awaited sign that there's somebody within the international community who's willing to stand up to Israel and the Western powers that have backed it to date in what has been a completely horrific genocide being carried out against the Palestinians in Gaza.
How would you define it as genocide?
In many ways, the world feels gaslit by where everything seems to be directed at the, if we talk about numbers, and that's not the best way to go, but overwhelmingly, the Lancet estimates that upwards maybe of 180,000 Palestinians in Gaza are dead at this point. And, without going into
obviously the numbers are disputed and people will dispute the use of the word genocide. I'm letting you all lay out your position. I'm not going to challenge you too much at the outset. So lay out your position for us.
Well, my position is that, we live in a world that has gone topsy-turvy over the last 14 months, where Israel has been given almost complete genocide in real time before the eyes of the world. And up until now, the international community has been completely paralyzed and willing to indulge them in that. And especially the big major former colonial powers, the UK, the United States, et cetera, et cetera. And I think this ruling comes as probably the hope is misplaced that perhaps that era of impunity may come to an end.
And Jonathan, welcome, Jonathan Turner. What do you make of the issuing of these arrest warrants? Were you surprised when they were issued?
Well, thank you, William, for having me on your programme, and good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Jonathan.
I was not entirely surprised because we did suspect that there will be no fair treatment. But I have to tell you this, that the prosecutor made a detailed statement back in May when he applied for the arrest warrants, in which he set out the allegations he was making. And I went through it, phrase by phrase, examining whether those allegations were true. And I found that every phrase of every sentence was false. In 40 years practicing as a barrister, I have not come across any other document written by a lawyer that contained more inaccurate statements per word than this statement of the prosecutor's case. We've set this all out. It's in a document, a letter to the prosecutor on our website, which sets out the evidence contradicting all of these allegations by the prosecutor. I should say that the allegations are not based on the scale of casualties or on genocide or anything like that. They're based on the allegations of alleged starvation, alleged prevention of humanitarian aid, but they are all false based on the evidence that we have demonstrated. And those have been ignored by the prosecutor and ignored by the court. The prosecutor asked the court to ignore them, and it appears that they did ignore all of the
Jonathan, you're a lawyer, I'm not, but given that these are arrest warrants, aren't we at the stage here where allegations are made, claims are made, charges are put in place? It would be for a trial, a future trial, to go through the evidence as you've been suggesting, and then to decide whether or not these war crimes claims stand up to the evidence in court. It would be for a trial to do that, wouldn't it?
Well, the problem is that anyone who is arrested will then spend several years in The Hague waiting for the trial and without any confidence that the court will deal any more fairly with the case than it has done to date.
That's an argument for never arresting anyone.
Well, there are considerable grounds for concern about this court, but particularly if you are the leader of a nation which is engaged in desperate warfare against genocidal enemies that are seeking to destroy it, and make no are proud of saying that they intend to destroy the state of Israel and its inhabitants. It is rather problematic if you are suddenly arrested as you're trying to conduct this very difficult war and trying to negotiate with your friends and allies and so on, and you can't fly anywhere. I don't think there's any prospect of him turning up or indeed anyone else who might be arrested. And this is one of the big problems of this.
But it does look like Benjamin Netanyahu's world has just become smaller in that 124 countries are signatories to this treaty around the International Court. If they meet their obligations, they have to arrest him, otherwise leave the treaty of the International Court. So he cannot travel to those countries, right?
Well, I think that is correct, that he will be at grave risk of travelling to those countries, or indeed travelling over those countries, because the flight could be forced down, or there could be an engine problem or whatever. So it is very problematic, not only for Netanyahu, not only for Gallant, against whom we know arrest warrants have been issued, but the International Criminal Court usually issues arrest warrants secretly. And so many Israelis who have been involved in seeking to defend their country against these genocidal terrorists who threaten to repeat their atrocities, their disgusting atrocities, again and again.
Just to sketch out what the judges say, because I read their statement last night, and they say that as you say, Jonathan, these arrest warrants would normally be made secretly to enable an arrest to be made, but they took the view that given that the actions being complained of in the arrest warrant are arguably continuing at present in Gaza, they wanted to give assurances to the people of Gaza that those actions were being addressed by the court. That is, you can decide whether you approve or disapprove of that statement by the court, but that's what they say. We're talking to Jonathan Turner, Dr. Brian Kelly, Angela Epstein and Patrick Corrigan, taking your calls as well. Just to give you a contrast, we heard what Yvette Cooper said this morning about whether the UK would comply with its obligations to make an arrest if President Netanyahu or the others named here were to visit the United Kingdom. This is what Emily Thornberry, the Labour MP and chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, said last night on The World Tonight.
Well, we're signatories to the Rome Agreement, and it's pretty clear on that what our obligations would be. We support the International Criminal Court. It's an independent court. If it has decided that there is a case for him to answer and that warrants should be issued, then as signatories, we ought to be arresting him,
So you're quite clear on that, because what came out of Downing Street earlier was not as clear. It talked about recognising the independence of the court, but it wouldn't go much further than that.
Well, it didn't want to speculate on whether or not he would arrive, and that they didn't want to be asked hypothetical questions. And but I'm just saying that it's kind of clear that given that we have signed up to the ICC, we have obligations as a result of that, and that is that if someone with a warrant outstanding from the ICC comes into your jurisdiction, then you have to arrest them.
So that is Emily Thornberry setting out what the legal obligations of the United Kingdom are in her judgment. Again, let's think about why we're not getting that kind of statement from members of the government themselves. And Patrick, we've been here before with Vladimir Putin, who I understand was planning to visit one country last year, and that particular country, a signatory to the ICC, communicated through their foreign ministry to Russia, that if he were to set foot in their country to attend a conference, for example, he would indeed be arrested, and then he cancelled his plans to visit that country. Is that what you anticipate the British government's response will be? Processive, rather bureaucratic, behind the scenes saying, don't put us in a position where we have to arrest you?
Well, Emily Thornberry was 100% correct in saying what the actual legal international obligations are of the UK government. They don't have a choice in this matter unless they're going to walk away from the International Criminal Court and the rule of international law.
But they can act behind the scenes to avoid making the choice, is my point.
Well, of course they can attempt to do that, but I think that Benjamin Netanyahu and the other wanted men, their world, as you say, has now shrunk. They are effectively fugitives from justice. I mean, I think if we cast our mind back to 1998 when General Pinochet, the former dictator of Chile, was arrested whenever he was in the UK, and that was a momentous day for international justice. If we think, you talk about Putin, I mean, just last year when the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin because of the crime of aggression in the invasion of Ukraine, the Russian government at that time used the word outrageous to describe the arrest warrant. Interestingly, the exact same word that the US administration has used to describe the arrest warrants issued yesterday. And I think that, if we look at what Simon Harris and Micheál Martin have said in the Republic, again, another member state of the International Criminal Court, they have not equivocated. They have said, and what this amounts to is that if Netanyahu, for instance, among the wanted men, if he is en route to the United States for a visit and they have to touch down in Shannon, then Mr. Netanyahu would be arrested by the Garda Síochána, and that's exactly what needs to follow.
That is what. Obviously, there's politics involved, not just legal. But as you say, that's the legal obligation. Politics is involved in this too. Angela, many people are surprised by Benjamin Netanyahu suggesting that the issuing of an arrest warrant is anti-Semitic. How could it be? It's an arrest warrant that's reviewed by a large series of judges from various countries, signatories of the treaty. They've looked through it. They've come to the decision it meets the threshold for an arrest warrant. How could that be described as anti-Semitic?
Because Israel is the world's only Jewish state, and therefore, and it is completely and consistently held up towards double standards. And one has to ask the question why there is this blind spot. And in the absence of any
where is the double standard here?
Okay, so first of all, the fact that, Jonathan has more or less outlined it, that this was a genocidal attack by a terrorist organisation who are dedicated to the destruction of Israel. It was an unprovoked attack. Why is a democratically elected leader who simply wants to protect his country being persecuted for this?
Well, you said persecution. Vladimir Putin's democratically elected. He has an arrest warrant.
Yes, but he illegally invaded Ukraine.
The allegation here is that war crimes have been committed. Shouldn't that be investigated?
Well, Jonathan will outline the deficiencies in the charge sheet in detail. He has them, but broadly
that's
speaking,
for a trial to determine. Isn't
wait a second, but it broadly disregards the fact that Israel has tried on numerous occasions to provide aid to Gaza. There's also the fact that UNRWA, we know, has a close and well-documented connection with Hamas, and the fact that Israel is held to these higher standards. We've also not mentioned the hostages in any of this. All the people that talk about genocide, they are forgetting the fact that innocent people were targeted by this terrorist organisation on October the 7th.
Nobody's defending the actions of Hamas, which were clearly genocidal. And one of their military commanders has been issued with an arrest warrant as well. So again, how is this treating Israel differently when the law is being applied?
Because, first of all, the individual Hamas operative that they've identified is dead, and that's such a lame attempt at trying to strike balance. The UN has a historically hostile relationship towards. Not the UN, the ICC and the UN has a historically hostile relationship towards Israel, and it is just farcical. Listening to your other contributors, farcical that a country which did not ask for a mass slaughter, the largest number of Jews to be killed in a single day since the Holocaust, innocent people who were at a music festival.
But Angela, all of that is accepted. That was
no, it is not. You're
absolutely,
not accepting
it is
William,
accepted.
Please let me finish.
It is
You're not
accepted.
letting me finish.
But the question for us is whether what Israel did in response to that horrific atrocity constituted, in some cases, war crimes. That's what the court's investigating.
So the inference, I know that they didn't reference genocide within the actual allegations, but the inference is there because of the fact that the suggestion of deliberate starvation. I've already covered the issue of getting aid in. Sinwar, when he was found, if you saw the enormous amount of food in his lair when they finally found him and killed him, he was, of course, the architect of October 7th. I'm absolutely astonished that your contributors failed to understand the definition of genocide, considering their
we're not talking about genocide, as you say. It's not in the arrest warrant.
But the inference is that Israel is deliberately killing large numbers of people from a particular nation or ethnic group because of who they are, with the aim of destroying that nation. Israel has repeatedly said its enemy is not the innocent people of Gaza. I don't know how many times people have to hear this.
Well, they have to hear it, but they don't believe everything that Israel says. That's the point.
Well, isn't it for
a court?
Thank you.
Isn't it for a court to decide? Jonathan, I'll come to you on that. Isn't it for a court to decide whether the evidence is there to back up any charge? In any area of life, it's for a court to determine that, isn't it?
Well, I don't think any leader of another country, apart from the Jewish state, would have been arrested or there would have been a warrant for the arrest of such a leader on such a ropey set of charges, so inadequate and so unsubstantiated and so contradicted by the available.
Okay, well, that's an argument for the defence, but that's not an argument against a trial.
And yes, you can go to trial, but as I said, one of the problems with this is that you are incarcerated in The Hague, unable to do your job for years on end. This is a fundamental problem of issuing arrest warrants on the basis of false evidence. It's wrong.
Yeah, but that's an opinion which should be tested in a trial. Isn't that how it works?
No. In fact, arrest warrants should only be issued if there is a real and substantial basis for them.
And the judges, a large collection of judges, have determined that there is a prima facie case for the arrest warrant.
No, not a large collection of judges. Three judges to be precise. One who resigned rather than get involved, which is itself rather suspicious. But I would like to address the question you started out with.
But isn't this suspicious? If you don't like the actions of a particular court, you ditch the entire court. Isn't that suspicious?
Well, no, I don't think so, because Israel has never accepted.
But imagine if we did that in ordinary life with courts. And you can always find people who will slag off judges. You'll always find people who accuse people of bias. You'll always find people, places like Northern Ireland, we have a whole history of this, as you know, Jonathan, of people not even accepting the legitimacy of courts and then dismissing even prima facie the evidence facing individuals before a court. We can always do that with any court. But is that what governments should be doing in response to the International Criminal Court?
Well, this court has a monumental record of incompetence, and you've had extraordinary things like photographs being used to show that the accused was guilty of atrocities. It turned out those photographs were taken thousands of miles away on the opposite end of the opposite side of the African continent.
So that would be something you could test in a trial.
Yes, but after you've been in prison for 5 years, that's not very satisfactory. You should make sure that you only arrest people when it's absolutely necessary and when there's a very strong case against them. And that's not what is done or threatened to be done. Here, that's why it is so wrong.
And do you think it's anti-Semitic?
Many countries, the UK is slightly unusual in this respect. Many countries have preliminary hearings by the prosecution before it goes ahead with charges, precisely in order to avoid this happening. And the International Criminal Court adopted such a system and also adopted a key principle of complementarity, that the International Criminal Court should not act if when it was possible for the national courts to act on this matter.
I just bring in? We haven't heard from Brian Kelly in a while. His phone was playing up, but I want to give Brian a word on this. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, can I come back on
thanks, William.
I want to try to get other voices in as well, because some people are thinking this is like an unbalanced discussion. I don't know why you think it's unbalanced. We have the chief executive for UK Lawyers for Israel. We have Angela Epstein, who's defending Israel. We have Patrick Corrigan, who's defending the arrest warrants. We have Brian Kelly, who's defending the arrest warrants. Brian Kelly.
Thanks, William. On the charge of anti-Semitism that I think, predictably, a lot of the pro-Israeli groups are making about this, and Netanyahu himself made it. I have to say that one of the features of this entire conflict and the response to it has been the prominence of young Jewish anti-Zionists in the UK, in the US, and around the world, aligning themselves with those speaking out against the genocide. And even, if this is an anti-Semitic push by the International Court, then you have to ask why it is that all the prominent Israeli human rights organizations, made up overwhelmingly of Jewish Israelis, have come out before today urging the International Court to bring these warrants, and now have come out to express their support for the court's moves. So I think, at one level, it's an extremely cynical and I think deplorable deployment of the charge of anti-Semitism in a world where there is actual real anti-Semitism on the rise.
Well, let's look at the argument that you've heard, Brian. Brian, would you accept that Israel was attacked on October the 7th in what amounted to an act of genocide by Hamas, and that Israel has the right to respond to that attack and defend its people?
So I'm curious about this. If I understand it's not a numbers game, but 1,139 now, declared the official number of those killed in the Gaza envelope on the 7th October. About 400 of them are military officials, or military personnel, military and security personnel. A considerable number of them were killed, as is now acknowledged, by Israeli-friendly fire. If, let's say, 700 or 800 civilians killed, and that is deplorable, absolutely, but let's say that's the case, how can 700 deaths amount to genocidal intent? And somewhere between 43 and 190,000 Palestinian deaths not qualify.
Well, as you said yourself, it's not a numbers game. It's to do with the motivation. It's to do with the motivation.
William, this is disgusting. You have to stop this.
Let me finish here. William, we have on record the statements of leading members of Netanyahu's cabinet declaring their genocidal intent. Gallant himself declared from day one, these are human animals. We will cut off food, fuel, electricity, all of that. All the things that are now in the charges that the court have brought in were said openly by members of Netanyahu's cabinet. And so I don't understand how any of that is defensible.
Angela.
I find it utterly repugnant that somebody who is not excuse me, let me finish. You're not Jewish. You don't experience anti-Semitism. You don't understand what it is to find the whole world.
Let's hear Angela. Let's hear Angela's response.
Hang on a second. It seems to be that only the Jews are told what they should find as an act of racism directed against them, and not. We're not allowed to
represent all Jews. I'm sorry. You don't represent the breadth of Jewish opinion on this question.
You're completely wrong. As somebody who is completely switched on and tuned into huge number of Jewish groups and organizations and read the opinion polls and talk to people and go to Israel, I can tell you that you may be sitting in your studio and think that, but you are so out of the park where it comes to this. And for you to have the temerity to say to me as a Jewish person, I don't recognize what anti-Semitism is disgusting and completely undermines everything else that you said. Equally egregious is that you say it's not about the numbers, and then you start crunching them as if people are just individuals individuals that should be thrown into a meat grinder, because you're overlooking beautifully and deliberately the fundamental issue here upon which the whole thing is predicated, is that Hamas, a terrorist organisation, Hamas controlled Gaza. Hamas controlled Gaza. Hamas has controlled Gaza since 2007. They could have made it a beautiful place. They could have looked after the Palestinian people, and instead they invaded Israel, knowing what the reprisals would be. And if you want to talk about numbers, about the number of misfired rockets that fall on their own territory, you can do that. I won't do that, because one loss of innocent life,
Angela,
one loss of innocent life is one too many.
Let's give Brian a response, please.
It's disgusting that you should even suggest that.
Brian Kelly.
Well, I don't know what I'm to respond to, but the simple fact is that there is a range of opinion among Jews internationally. And I think what is concerning for Zionism, for the project, and for the Israeli state, and they say this openly, by the way, this is in print, is that they have lost a whole generation of young Jews in the United States who, when I grew up in Boston, would have almost unanimously supported the state of Israel. That's no longer the case, and it will never be the case again.
Okay.
I think.
All right, thank you very much. Sue's on the line. Hello, Sue. Welcome.
Me in, and
Hi, Sue. Sorry, start again. We just missed the beginning of your sentence.
Okay. I've had to listen to Angela. Angela, how dare you? You do not represent me. I'm Jewish. My family is Jewish. We go back generations. We understand persecution. We understand oppression. I totally reject that you represent us. And thousands, hundreds of thousands of Jews across the world, including here in Ireland, reject Netanyahu's conflation of Zionism and Judaism. What's happening in Israel, apartheid Israel, has nothing to do with the Judaism that I was brought up with. You should be ashamed of yourself. 44,000 people died. Bombs dropped on tents. 2,000-pound bombs dropped on children. Medics killed. Over 3,000 killed in Lebanon. And you're telling me it's self-defense? How dare you?
A final word. Angela, please.
Well, I think, first of all, it just shows your gross misunderstanding of the situation when you call Israel an apartheid state. When Arabs serve on the judiciary, they work as doctors in the hospitals. You speak to Israeli Arabs there in the country, and I go a lot. They're very happy to be under the jurisdiction of Israel because of the freedoms that they have. I respect your right to an opinion.
Absolutely
I respect.
Not true.
Okay, well, I'm
absolutely
there a lot.
Not
I'm there
true.
a lot.
I'm sorry.
So I can only tell you
I'm
what
sorry,
I see.
William, we have had two pro-Israeli voices dominating this discussion. And unfortunately, you didn't think it appropriate to bring a Palestinian voice in. And I must say, I am very disappointed in
all
that.
I could say,
and I have got 2 minutes at the end of this discussion to challenge you. Now, the ICJ has called Israel's apartheid state separation, siege of Gaza, attacks on ordinary Palestinians in their lands in the West Bank. They have called it a crime against humanity, but you don't address that. Only today, the defense minister, administrative detention against West Bank settlers, who we know are destroying Palestinian property, shooting people, burning olive groves, and you're telling me Palestine isn't beautiful, and yet they're out to destroy it. And yet we have over 10,000 Palestinians, including minors, in administrative detention. And your other lawyer speaker that was speaking there, Jonathan, I think his name is, has said, oh my God, they're going to spend years in prison. That's unfair. Do you know how long some of these Palestinians, including children, have been in prison with no charges? And they are tortured, they are beaten, and they are raped. And you're telling me you're doing it.
You have no proof for that.
I do. You're telling me in our name, do not use our history and
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We are really nearly out of time. Patrick, I'll give you a final word on this. Go ahead.
Well, again, going back to the original start of this discussion, is that
that is what I'm desperately trying to keep us focused on what the UK's response should be to this. What should be the international community's response to the issuing of these arrest warrants?
And it's really clear. It's really clear. Holding senior officials, whether they are the leaders of the State of Israel or the leaders of Hamas, accountable for their litany of crimes in Israel and Palestine. It's an absolutely crucial step towards ending not just the continuing violations of rights in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, but ending the killing. And we hope that these arrest warrants will be a step towards addressing the continued dispossession and oppression of Palestinians under Israel's unlawful occupation and, as Sue correctly said, under a system of apartheid. So yesterday was a good day for international justice, but we have to see an end to the killing, and we need to see those who are responsible for war crimes, crimes against humanity, held to account. That's absolutely crucial, and it's important the UK steps up and stops equivocating around whether or not they would arrest these wanted men if they step on British soil.
All right, thank you all very much. Patrick Corrigan, Angela Epstein, Brian Kelly and Jonathan Turner.
Call us on 0